Good morning or good afternoon, everybody. Here from Hamburg, very sunny and characteristically so. I'm really looking forward to talk about a little bit about commercial contracts, because even though they have been around for a number of years, in fact, decades, many NGOs we work around 300 NGOs per year. We are not particularly adapted or still struggling to categorize how to use commercial contracts and then actually apply them and use them. There are some very good examples of how NGOs use commercial contracts to further their mission, to diversify their funding. And we wanted to learn from those examples and then put together the tips that we're summarizing here today. So as Jules indicated, the real value of the conversations of these webinars is in the conversation. So therefore, I'm always asked to get through the slides as soon as possible so that we can leave plenty of time for the Q&A. As Jules says, just plop the questions into the Q&A tool and we'll get around to it. If there are specific questions about a specific commercial tender or a specific aspect of their management, then please leave your email address as well, and we'll try to get that answered in the next few days. My colleagues and I around the world are doing that because MZN is a social enterprise. Our mission is to build stronger NGOs in terms of funding, operating better, and using smarter strategies. And as a social enterprise, our target is to subsidize many of our services by 2030 with training. We're there already. And we're now back with in-person training even, which I think Jules will mention after this webinar as well. So hopefully we can jump at some point across the screen and see each other in person as well over the next year or so. Right, let's dive in. Commercial contracts. Basically, they are really important for most NGOs. So our tip would be to go for it mostly, because the total amount, for simple reason, the total amount of commercial contracts available is far greater than that of grants. If you look at how donors and how foundations allocate their funding, then the amount available for commercial contracts exceeds that for grants, manifold. So there is simply just far more money in commercial contracts, frankly, by volume. There's also a moral risk here, or a moral reason to go for them. If NGOs do not go for these contracts, then we run the risk of only purely commercial entities responding to these calls for tenders, as they're called, or these commercial contracts. And that in itself risks the development of the aid sector becoming just too commercial. There is this huge risk inherent in any tender, of course, that commercial contracts externalize or do not tackle the hard development stuff anymore. That's because commercial contracts are targeted at achievable projects where the risk is really manageable and the likelihood of getting paid is pretty high. That means that hard to do things, or reaching the last mile services, or reaching marginalized communities, or difficult to quantify targets, tend not to be the subject of commercial contracts. And therefore, commercial contracts are an important tool, but for most NGOs, success in their mission, in their work, will require a combination of grant, of these contracts, and other income sources. That, in turn, really means that a commercially capable organization that at the heart of it remains on its NGO culture and feeling, those NGOs will make a huge difference here. And we did say before in other webinars and in other conversations at conferences that NGOs need to smarten up financially on financial tools and on these commercial contracts possibly, or learn from those who do it well already without losing their NGO soul. I think therein lies an important aspect of building the NGO for the future. So that's about the commercial contracts at large. Let's have a look into the 5 concrete things you can do to attract a commercial contract, and maybe what we should consider when we're managing them. as with everything in life, the first step to get something done is getting ready for it. So getting ready includes some seemingly easy tasks, like are we actually set up correctly to manage such a contract? Do you know your internal costings, your day cost of the staff member, for example, where you can say we need to achieve at least this level of financial sustainability? Can you store a profit? Do you know if you make a surplus on the contract, what to do with this? In your legislation, how long can you lay over a profit? Usually, a surplus from a project in a non-profit organization can be taken to the next year without losing your non-governmental or non-profit status. That is not the case for every jurisdiction out there. Germany, US, and UK, that's not a problem. You might be in a jurisdiction where it might be. So we need to get ready by knowing all these things. The other part, of course, is hitting the sweet spot and selecting the right projects. That pre-selection is really crucial because we want to hit the sweet spot between a commercial viability that makes sense for us as an organization in terms of what we do, impact, as well as what we earn from it, i.e. financial targets, as well as, and actually most importantly, the programmatic fit. And we're not going to change what you do, be it water or migration responses or whatever it is you do. You're not going to change that. So you want to make sure that the commercial contract advances your NGO mandate and earns you unrestricted funding. And in order to hit both tenants, in order to hit that sweet spot, that pre-selection must be very good. And that can come in simple form of a checklist. 7 to 15 criteria that is being used by people within the organization who look at commercial contracts to pre-select if this contract should be taken into further consideration. Once you've done these things, you need a realistic plan. And by realistic plan, I'm hinting at a particular aim. What is it in terms of amount of work, amount of income, and amount of impact, if you can quantify it in any way or approximation, that you want to achieve? I've seen plans going into commercial contracts where getting a commercial tender or getting a commercial contract in itself is a target. Now that target is achieved on day one of you getting a tender in. It's not a particularly smart goal. So setting a realistic plan of how much we want to engage on commercial contracts, to what degree does this fit our funding mix, to what degree does this advance our impact pathway, that is the kind of answers you want to get ready for. And then finally, you do have, like grants actually, a lot of competition here, but maybe a bit of a different type of competition. And I've seen it sometimes that NGOs who are getting serious about commercial contracts start to mirror their private sector or development implementer counterparts. And I think that's a mistake. I think as an NGO, we have unique characteristics that represent a absolutely USP, a unique selling point. Our non-profit mandate and the fact that you have possibly longer established country experience in the area that you're tendering for makes you unique. Just pitching towards those organizations that routinely run on commercial contracts and thereby minimizing your NGO-iness, that's the word, is not the right structure. I'll promise you from experience of having worked with this across several NGOs in the UK, US, and Europe, and Africa, and Asia as well, that where we are pronunciating and where we are communicating our unique characteristics as an NGO in a commercial contract, this comes across as a convincing selling factor. Good. Hope there's a lot of work and a lot of soul searching to be done there. Then before we start, I'm afraid that there is still a bit more preparation to be done. And that is in relationship to the speed. A commercial contract, particularly when it comes in form of a framework contract, develops usually faster than a grant. And in order to realistically write a good proposal and a good bid for that commercial contract, you need to make a go or no-go decision pretty fast, typically between 3 to 7 days. Now, you might be working at one of these organizations which does that already, but if not, then try to minimize the amount of time your organization needs to formally make a decision whether to go for it or not. My experience as well is many NGOs, they really struggle with the administrative burden of the contracts. So there is a different type of administrative burden compared to a grant, and many NGOs these days are still operating in structures that have been built to manage grants. So that there needs to be some change. That's the bad news. The good news is that most of it can be pre-planned. The old saying goes that prior proper preparation prevents poor performance. 6P principle. And this prior and proper preparation can really reduce the cost and the time of compliance and reporting. The last thing you want to do is having submitted a bid, having won the commercial contract, and then having to rebuild administrative structures. So if you are serious about commercial tenders, you may as well get ahead of it and do it now. You will eventually win one. And in the same vein, there needs to be a streamlined process to enable those critical project decisions to be made in a few days. These contracts are inherently more agile. They are inherently faster. That's what it is. Commercial contract is designed to do. The donor cares way more about the result than the way of doing things. So therefore, again, you need a decision-making structure that tends to be able to make decisions faster than some of the grant implementing organizations are maybe used to. Right. The budget. The budget usually presents a particular challenge to some NGOs because the budget in a commercial contract is completely different. Usually, or many NGOs, work with a sort of capped cost budget. This is what we have in terms of grant, plus a management fee, or plus an unrestricted fee. And both are usually set by the donor. In a commercial contract, these things are a bit different. They don't come with this predetermined price tag. So they don't come with a budget saying, you have to do this for 1 million or 500,000. So bidders put their most innovative, their most cost-effective, and their most relevant cost structure to this project, to this proposal, as they think it suits the project and as they think they can win. So it's basically a different way of budgeting, therefore, because that needs to be understood. And even though that makes, that in itself is not rocket science, and many NGOs and many NGO leaders we work with on a day-by-day basis, they nod at us and say, yeah, that makes sense, I can do this. The devil lies in the detail. So we need to budget from the bottom up. We need to budget on a cost-plus basis. And we need to still think about ways to minimize our costs without cutting our unrestricted or our surplus funding away from that. So it's a very different way of budgeting, which is not complicated. It's basically just from the bottom up rather than the top down. And for most organizations, it takes a while to get that done from the finance to the programs. Happy to discuss that in the questions. The sort of fourth tip, the penultimate tip, is the alliances. Now, very rarely in a large commercial contract does the lead agency implement the project alone. So like with grants, alliances, subcontracting, consortia, they're pretty much the norm. But unlike grants, they need to be built pretty early, thematically, and then applied to a series of contracts. The efficient thing being here is that once you've built an alliance, you can use it several times. The inefficient thing is you need to build it probably before you bid. So, of course, you're all very accustomed to working through implementation partners, but for commercial contracts, this arrangement needs to be really better defined. There needs to be a very clear task delegation and a very clear contract between the implementation partners. And that is because the costs for doing tasks lies with the commercial contract holder. It is not just a flow down clause from the grant contract. So the partnership agreement or the joint venture agreement or the consortium agreement that you may have in place needs to be simply more defined down to task delegation, cost centers, and clarity of who does what. Otherwise, and I promise you, it will get difficult. Good. I'm already running out of time here, so I can see that. The last point for today is rethinking how we actually manage such a commercial contract. So it's a different way from a grant management again. The requirements for administration and reporting management are often more onerous, and they are results focused. Less focused on how you do things as a justification for retaining, not having to repay the grant, and way more focused on the result of the work. So the contracting agency or the donor agency, as we can say here, is less of a partner to the NGO who gets involved into the contract, but more of a client who really expects excellent client service responses within hours to satisfy their own and the taxpayer demands. So again, that changes the implementer or the NGO to a kind of service center for the donor to implement this contract. And we shouldn't be in any doubt about what this is. We are providing a service for the donor in our area of expertise, and we are doing this to further the impact you have as an organization. But you are turning from an NGO into a service contractor, at least for the realms, for the scale of this program. So it requires a very different project management mindset. So from a compliance-focused one to a results-focused one. And lots of you are very impact and results-focused anyway, but then most of NGOs operating a grant are tied in a plan that has been formulated at concept stage or latest at proposal stage 2, 3, 4 years ago at the grant. That can change in a commercial contract way faster. So we need to make sure that we have the management capacity to change that. None of it, I promise you, is rocket science. None of it is unachievable. It's absolutely worth it, given the sheer amount of money that there is for commercial contracts. But we shouldn't walk into it blindly either. Good. I hope these 5 things really, really help. That you can use them. It's a pretty short and concrete message I have here for all of us today. And I think Jules wants to mention a few things, and then we'll get to your questions if there are any.
Great. Thank you so much, Chris, for running through all that interesting content. I think lots to think about. Do you mind popping to the slide before on the...
Oh, sorry, did I jump one?
You did.
So there we are.
So just for everyone to know, our in-person training courses are back. We have set locations around the world, and we are also open to new locations. So since we have lots of South Africans on, maybe we should create one in South Africa.
I'd love that.
Yes, it would be your first time coming to South Africa then. So we have 3 courses set up: Write Winning Proposals, NGO Financial Sustainability, and Write Winning Proposal Budgets and Monitoring Project Budgets. Very interesting content. We are also open to other subjects if you have a specific subject in mind, and we can set up a course around that. So please do get in touch with us. You can use the same email address, or you can log onto our website and register for the courses. Oh, thank you. Peter said he would love a course in South Africa. We will definitely look at it. So yeah, let us know and register and join us in our in-person training. We are getting very fully subscribed to the courses on offer.
Yeah, they do go quite fast.
Yeah. And then we have upcoming webinars, How to Get Donor Mapping Right, which will be next week, Wednesday. And then in October, 2 weeks past that, we'll write better proposals to secure better funding, which is also always a very popular webinar. So please do register on our website, mzninternational.com. All right. Are we over to some questions?
Yeah, if there are any.
There is one question from Daniel. he has just asked, could you mention some examples of what kinds of commercial contracts NGOs have been well suited or had a competitive advantage?
It's a really good question, Daniel. So first of all, there are commercial contracts, obviously, for every sort of area. There's a lot of funds in commercial contracts. As I said at the beginning, they eclipse what is available in grant funding. That in and of itself isn't the reason to just go for it, but it's an area of funding we shouldn't ignore. But as I said at the very beginning, we should only go for this, pocket or this top of funding when and if it advances our mandate, if it really furthers our impact. And you heard me talking about the sweet spot earlier. The primary motivation of any NGO isn't financial. Obviously, it's not, and it shouldn't ever be. So we want to hit the sweet spot of where this advances our impact, or where the commercial contracts on a subject and in a location, obviously, a geographic location, where we're already working. With that being said, there are some unique selling points or some commercial advances that NGOs have. One of them is that in my experience, which is obviously very limited by the nature of being individual experience, and that of my colleagues, NGOs tend to have a better grassroots network and have a longer established presence in the country they operate in. And for contracts that matter, for contracts where that matters, you have a unique selling point. So for example, we worked with a client organization recently, a partner NGO, where we're building children's safe spaces in a commercial contract. Here, the grassroots network, the fact that they've been established in this country for 2-3 decades, that they have a network of local implementers, has been the unique selling point. Has been that let's just make them more palatable and more successful as an implementer. What gets me personally, if you allow me one comment a lot, is that because the management is very different, as I tried to highlight here, sometimes commercial contractor get that sort of commercial contract, get the management fee for it, and or set the budget into it as well, and then pass on the work to an NGO anyway. So in a way, we may as well go for it directly and cut off the middleman. I hope that helps.
Thanks, Chris. Pascal has commented and asked a question. There is a lot of funds. That sounds like a perverse reason for NGO. How can commercial contract contribute to the mission of development of an NGO?
Fantastic, Pascal. So that's exactly what I just talked about. Yes, by and of itself, there being a lot of commercial contracts is not the reason to go. Absolutely not. But my experience again has been that at least up to pre-COVID, many commercial contract types have simply been dismissed for sake of being a commercial contract, not a grant. And I completely understand this because most NGOs have been built for either fundraising or for grant management. But there being sufficient funding from the donors we know anyway, so most grants are coming from the UK FCDO, the European Union is giving lots of commercial contracts, USAID, large foundations are now converting previous grant opportunities into commercial contracts. They are, there's no reason not to go for them. For these purposes, so the pre-selection is important where it makes impact sense. Jude, so you know what I mean with impact sense? Does that make sense? I'll take that as a yes.
Yes, sorry.
Okay.
Great, thank you. Pascal's asked another question. What are the best commercial contract providers?
Josh, what defines the best? I don't know about the best, but commercial contracts are being given by every large institutional institutional donor. For the area, for example, of agriculture, technical vocational training, lots of water projects, lots of food safety. For example, we had one recently child safe spaces. These are projects that are particularly suitable to commercial contracts, and donors are using them more and more. By terms of percentage, USAID and state are now giving out more commercial contracts and grants. And you can see why, because they get the results. But as I do say, they risk of not reaching difficult to change problems. So for advocacy or for marginalized communities, commercial contracts are not suitable. Some donors who are more veteran users of commercial contracts, such as the FCDO or previously DFID in the UK, are pretty acknowledging that now. The GIZ, for example, I've found may not have yet woken up to that completely. Basically, it's just another contracting tool in donors' arsenal. Sorry, not the donors' arsenal of how to contract something, but it really isn't suitable for everything. So, for example, for humanitarian work, it is just not suitable.
Thanks, Chris. Adrian has asked, what are reasonable profit margins given that these contracts are competitive? 10, 20, 10, 30, or 50%?
So, Adrian, that's a really good question. And the answer is yes, all of it, all of the above. So we've written, for example, I'll give you a few examples, a commercial contract for an organization in agriculture in Nigeria last month. Here, the competitive field was so strong, and they have done very similar work just very recently, so very little, and it was a continuation program that they wanted to, could, and needed to be very, very competitively priced. And they could do so because they had experience in the area, the thematic area, and that location, that they pretty much foresaw the risks, and they knew had the contacts, and the timing worked as well. So they could go down as low as 10% on this one. I think they actually ended up 9-point-something% over a 2-year contract. On the other side, a colleague of mine has just written and submitted a commercial contract on behalf of another partner NGO, which is in a new technical area with more difficult to quantify results, which trigger the payment. And here they went for a 37% margin on top. So it depends on where you want to be, how much competition you have, how much you want this, and what risks you accept. The higher the risk, the higher the surplus you will charge. Probably tends to be. Adrian, I hope that gives you an answer.
Thank you. Warimu has asked, at what point or situation does an organization begin to go commercial?
Warimu, that's a really good question as well. As I said at the very beginning, commercial contracts are one out of sort of 4 or 5 funding tools for an NGO. And the management and the business development capacity for it needs to be there. So we certainly I personally haven't seen very small, very young NGOs go for it immediately. I've seen commercial contractors who accepted grants, so they went the other way, 3 to 4 years into their existence. I haven't seen it from a point of view where small and local NGOs are doing it immediately as well. As soon as you are, however, a multi-country NGO with several thematic areas that are suitable for commercial contracts, then assuming that your mandate is served by scaling, by managing more funding and increasing your programmatic footprint and your operational area, if that is the case, I would be surprised if commercial contracts shouldn't be part of your funding arsenal.
Great, thanks, Chris. Daniel has asked, are there any good databases to find what commercial contracts are out there?
So commercial contracts in the EU and for all EU member states are subject to the same procurement guidelines that grants are. So you find them on the European Journal website. If you can be bothered to go through that massive database that is updated several times a day. The US federal websites like Work with USAID and BIS the business portal of the US government. They include commercial contract as well. The problem here is the data overload. You can even go to large notification websites like Development Aid or DevEx or Grantee. But the problem here is the information overload. If you are searches for these commercial contracts aren't consistent and good, you're going to see all kinds of commercial contracts down to municipal services under the keyword tender in these portals. So you're gonna have to spend several weeks probably getting used to the various portals, or you just subscribe to a human notification service or opportunity identification service.
Great, thank you. I just see a question popping up on your answer. Are there links or websites to these contracts?
Sorry, say that again, please.
Are there links or websites to these contracts?
Yeah, as I said, the normal donor portals include commercial contracts, and the European journal, the EU journal, will include them as well. But selecting the right ones is going to be absolutely important. More important here is obviously building relationship to the donors you already know. But that's the same for grants and for commercial contracts.
Great, thank you. We have an interesting question here. For many commercial contracts, if you're a consortium partner but not the lead, it is very difficult to establish just how much work will stem from the contract if successful. How can you accurately weigh up the administrative burden versus eventual income generation, e.g. as part of the go or no go?
That's a really good question. It sounds to me like the person who asked this is considering a framework agreement. Now there are, just for the sake of definition here, there are commercial contracts where you do know, what the volume will be. They are usually single large-scale programs. There are, of course, framework agreements as well, where you apply to be part of a framework. So it's like it says, it's a frame in which a number of yet to be defined contracts will be launched. And there it's very difficult to foresee how active a framework will be, how many calls or proposals you will get in this framework, and how successful you'll be. I completely get that, difficult to do. The decision that management has to make here, that you have to make, is how serious do you want to get. If you're a part of a framework and the framework application takes some time, and we really want to use that as a capacity, then you have to build the administrative capacity in advance of pitching for the individual contracts. If you're going for a single large commercial contract, then you can estimate the administrative and frankly, that is the relationship building costs as well, fairly accurately in advance. So I hope that helps a bit.
Great, thank you, Chris. We just have 2 more questions here. Adrian, is it more or less important to build a relationship with commercial donors?
I think it's just the same, really just the same. What wasn't asked, Adrian, but what is aligned to this is the definition of success in a tender or in a commercial contract is absolutely critical, because many, not all, but many commercial contracts are paid at least partially or even fully upon result. That result needs to be quantifiable. So the relationship is important insofar as there needs to be an agreement of what constitutes success and therefore triggers payment and therefore counts as this was a successful project. And I think to make it the more concrete you can do this, the better. And usually that requires a pretty strong mandate or a pretty strong relationship with the client, who's obviously in other fora, like in your donor in that case. So I just want to mention that.
Thank you, Chris. Simeon had asked a question earlier about the links and the websites to the contracts, and I think this follows on from that about what are the thematic areas.
Yeah, so again, commercial contracts are not viable for every type of development goal that we absolutely need to achieve in this world. they are viable and they are a useful tool for those projects which have a quantifiable result. So, for example, increase the agriculture yield by 5%, or make sure that women have better access to the legal system measured by some indicator, like so many more cases through the legal system, or prison reform, or things like that. So these things can be, as long as the result can be nailed down as concretely as possible, they can be subject of a commercial contract. And arguably, many donors argue that they achieve better success this way. I think the jury's out, and it depends on what we're talking about and which area and geographic location we're talking about. But the prevailing consensus amongst donors is that when you can commercialize something, do it. Rightly or wrongly, that seems to be the trend.
Great, thank you, Chris. Thank you so much for all the insights and for answering all these questions. I think that is all we have for today.
Oh, excellent. We're on time for once.
I know.
I mean, that's amazing.
Go team.
Fantastic. Jules, thanks very much for managing this. Thank everybody for dialing in. If there's anything my colleagues and I can help you out with, please do send an email through the website or directly to Jules or me, and we'll get back to you. And thanks for all the good work.
And sign up for our training courses.
Yes, that too, of course. Look forward to it. Actually,
thank you.
Cheers. Bye.